Imagine dedicating your life to the cause, only then to find a fate so tragic it becomes legendary for generations. The apostles of Jesus, those 12 men who walked beside him, watched his miracles, and relayed his teachings, has a different destiny that tries their faith to the breaking point. But how was their course of action met? What led to their ultimate sacrifices, and what lessons can we draw from their lives and deaths? Today, we will uncover the tragic end of the 12 apostles, exploring their legacies and the price they paid for their unwavering faith. They were more than just followers of Christ. They were his closest confidants, chosen to carry his message to the farthest corners of the earth. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the Less, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. Each had his own story, strengths, and struggles. Yet in their differences, they had a common mission: to spread the gospel. After Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, these men were filled with the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, emboldened to preach the good news. However, their mission wasn't without peril. They faced persecution, rejection, and eventually, martyrdom. Peter, the rock upon which Jesus built his church, was known for his fiery passion. He was jailed by the Romans at Rome, again under Nero, and according to tradition, he was crucified upside down. Peter requested this mode of execution because he felt unworthy to be crucified the same way as Christ. His death was therefore seen as the ultimate in humility and faith. Peter died amid intense persecution. He was condemned to death during one of the most infamous crackdowns on Christians during Emperor Nero's reign and was arrested in Rome. This period witnessed brutal executions meant to deter other people from following Christ. According to accounts, in his last days before he was crucified, he spent his time ministering to fellow prisoners, which offered hope, even as his end loomed. This decision to be crucified upside down was not only an act of humility, but a powerful statement of his undying love and deep reverence for the sacrifice that Christ made. Andrew was Peter's brother. He took the gospel to what is today modern Greece. His ministry culminated in his arrest and execution by crucifixion on an X-shaped cross in the city of Patras. Still, Andrew preached from the cross, an example of unshakable faith. He went on long missionary journeys, spending time in Scythia and Achaia. His bold preaching quite often provoked conflicts with the local authorities and with pagan priests. At Patras in Greece, his persistence in faithfulness and his ability to convert many to Christianity led him to imprisonment. The Roman proconsul was furious when Andrew succeeded. He ordered Andrew's execution. For 2 whole days, Andrew hung on that X-shaped cross, suffering terribly and using his final moments to encourage people to turn towards Christ. His agonizing death inspired many people to convert and made him the symbol of endurance and faith in adversity. The first apostle to be martyred was James, the son of Zebedee and brother of John. King Herod Agrippa ordered his execution by sword in 44 AD. The death of James was a turning point since the apostles' mission would be accompanied by heavy costs. James was one of the most important sons of Zebedee among the apostles. As an inner circle of Jesus, he was witness to important events, such as the Transfiguration and the Garden of Gethsemane. After the resurrection of Jesus, he preached with fervor and performed miracles. He was one of the first targets of Herod Agrippa when he tried to crush the movement of Christians. James was beheaded by the sword immediately. Yet his martyrdom became a source of strength for the early church, because even the threat of death would not silence their testimonies. John was a favorite disciple, and one thought to have died of natural causes, as he was the only apostle not to be martyred. He still had a difficult life for himself. He was sent into exile on the island of Patmos, and on that island, he authored the Book of Revelation. Not a martyr, John suffered isolation, pain for his beliefs. His survival during persecution was extraordinary in itself. Exiled to Patmos, John got the visions recorded in the book of Revelation. Much earlier still, he had experienced many trials. He had once been thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil in Rome with no damage at all, and the miraculous occurrence, of course, inspired several conversions. John later returned to Ephesus and continued leading the church. In this capacity, he instructed believers and strengthened their faith. His natural death in old age neither diminished his impact, but testified to Christ across generations. Philip preached in various parts of the world and later ended up in the town of Hierapolis in the present Turkey. He died for proclaiming the gospel of Jesus to the wife of a leading Roman official. According to reports, Philip was crucified or stoned to death. His history reminds of the cost of standing firm in faith against the norms of society. His work at Hierapolis was particularly very challenging for the city in terms of pagan practices in which the people were engaged. His argument with a city official over idolatry resulted in his arrest. Along with his companion Bartholomew, he was subjected to severe torture. While Bartholomew was released, Philip was crucified. Some accounts suggest he was hung upside down and preached to the crowd even in his final moments. His death not only solidified the Christian community in Hierapolis, but also inspired future missionaries to carry on his work. Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, carried the gospel to regions such as India and Armenia. His end was particularly brutal. He was flayed alive and then beheaded for his faith. Bartholomew's martyrdom portrays the extreme hostility early Christians had to face while spreading their message. Bartholomew's travels brought him to remote and hostile lands, including Armenia. His success in converting King Polemius of Armenia infuriated the local religious leaders. He was subjected to one of the most gruesome martyrdoms in history, flaying alive. Even as his skin was stripped from his body, he apparently continued to preach the good news. His ghastly execution is a chilling reminder of the violent resistance early believers encountered. But it is also a testament to the extraordinary fearlessness and faith that Bartholomew demonstrated in the face of excruciating agony. Matthew, the converted tax collector and apostle, is said to have preached in Ethiopia. He is said to have been martyred by a sword while attending to the daughter of a king. The life of Matthew was one of transformation, from an outcast tax collector to a servant of Christ. From being a despised tax collector to becoming an apostle was remarkable enough for Matthew. After many years of preaching in Judea, he felt that the gospel needed to be spread in Ethiopia. There, he converted many, including the king's family. This, however, led him into conflict with local authorities and pagan priests. When he refused to renounce Christ, he was executed, allegedly by sword. Matthew's death testified to the apostles' readiness to go into new lands, risking everything to preach the message of salvation. Thomas is remembered for doubting Jesus' resurrection, but he traveled to India to spread the gospel. He founded several Christian communities, but faced fierce opposition. Thomas was eventually martyred by being speared to death. His story highlights the courage it took to carry the gospel to distant lands. Thomas's journey to India was a bold and dangerous endeavor. His mission led to the establishment of some of the earliest Christian communities in the region, many of which still exist today. Thomas faced initial resistance but succeeded. His final martyrdom was by local Brahmin priests, who were fearful of his teaching to their power. They stabbed him in the back with a spear as he prayed in a cave. His tale is also sometimes overshadowed by initial doubt, yet he himself becomes an exemplar of how faith and belief can change people. James the Less was the son of Alphaeus and an important figure in the early Church of Jerusalem. He was pious and religious. According to tradition, he was thrown from the top of the temple and beaten to death with a club. His martyrdom meant his resolve to lead the church amid intensified persecution. James the Less was a pillar of the early church in Jerusalem and led believers during intense times of persecution. His leadership was such that he became an enemy to religious authorities who regarded Christianity as a heresy movement. The high priest Ananus had him executed by order, accusing him of breaking Jewish law. He was hurled from the pinnacle of the temple, stoned, and clubbed to death. Yet even at the point of death, James did not cease to pray for his murderers. In his death, he embodied the very spirit of the apostles, compassion, unflinching in the execution of their calling. Thaddeus was also known as Jude. He went to Persia, now Iran, to preach Christianity. With Simon the Zealot, he incurred the wrath of local despots. According to traditions, Thaddeus was beaten to death for denying his faith. His zeal reminds us of the apostles that did not back down from carrying out their mission. Simon the Zealot, a man of fierce loyalty and zeal, was with Thaddeus in Persia. He too suffered martyrdom, being sawed in two. Simon's life and death epitomize the passion of his devotion to Christ, even in the brutal execution of his life. The story of Judas Iscariot is perhaps the most tragic of all. After Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver, guilt ate at him. He ended by taking his own life. That end speaks volumes about the cost of betrayal and desperation. It was an ugly death compared to what others met, so very opposite choices could be. Perhaps nothing is more famous or talked about as Judas Iscariot and the betrayal of Jesus. His greed, disillusionment, or misunderstanding of Jesus' mission led him to sell his master for 30 pieces of silver. However, he soon understood the seriousness of his deed. He could not carry the burden of guilt and desperation anymore, hence, he went back and hanged himself. Unlike the other apostles, Judas's story ends in despair, not redemption, but with a somber reminder of what goes wrong with betrayal and of the need to seek forgiveness. The tragic ends of the apostles were not in vain. Their sacrifices provided a foundation for Christianity to grow. Their stories are testaments to the power of faith and the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity. These men carried the gospel across continents, ensuring that the message of Christ endured for generations. The tragic end of the 12 apostles is one of the most powerful reminders of the cost of faith and dedication. Their lives and deaths inspire one to reflect on one's own commitments and values, asking questions such as, what am I ready to stand for? How far am I willing to go to uphold truth and justice? How would you describe the apostles' sacrifice? Which of the stories inspired you the most? Leave comments below. Like and subscribe for more deep dives on the stories that made history come alive.